I want to ask you about something that Frank Sinatra said. And Frank Sinatra said, "My greatest teacher was not a vocal coach or the work of other singers, but
Tommy Dorsey.
But the way Tommy Dorsey breathed and phrased on the trombone." What did he know that about your instrument that other singers maybe haven't realized?
Well, let's be clear. It was only Tommy Dorsey. I mean, he was really one of the extreme and one of the originators of a certain style of playing, which was more of it was less rooted in jazz and more rooted in kind of that lyrical style. I don't know if he studied opera. I have no idea where the concept came to him, but it just has to do with expanding the lung capacity. And so that, I mean, Tommy Dorsey, I know this because he would play 16 and 18 second phrases with regularity. And there's even one 26 or 27 second phrase on a song called Music Maestro Please. Unbelievable. So yeah, that was Tommy Dorsey just had a special thing. And so anyway, sorry.
It's interesting because you hear of like classical composers like Richard Wagner saying, "Don't look at the trombones, they'll think you like them."
Right.
Or don't give them too much attention, they'll think you like them, which is ironic for somebody who wrote so much, for the brass section in his music. But I think the trombone is a wholly underrated instrument.
I think that may have been accredited to Wagner. I don't know that he necessarily is the one that said it. But so the trombone in the orchestra is way different. And typically in the orchestra, trombone is going to have a more supportive role. So the question is how that support happens. In trombone and jazz, of course, it's more, it's also a supportive role in the big band, but it can be more of a solo instrument. So it depends. Tommy Dorsey style, just as an example, he played more in a soloist. Most soloists play with smaller equipment and they play closer to almost like a French horn. So if you listen at Arthur Pryor, who was one of the great trombonists with John Philip Sousa's band, he was a great soloist and he's got dexterity. He's gone all up and down. It's typically smaller equipment. A lot of the guys that play like that. So Dorsey's thing was he played smaller equipment and just knew how to focus that air. And of course, he had a lot of preparation. In the orchestra, it's just different. But, my upbringing was more the orchestral sound. So when I hear the sound on the trombone, I'm thinking more of that Mahler's Third Symphony and, Dennis Wick when he was 25 years old with the London Symphony playing, just that full tone is more what I'm thinking, which is different from, again, the soloist thing is more generally a smaller type of a sound.
Right. And let's be honest, no matter how good big band music is, or Mahler or Wagner might be, it's nowhere near as much fun as the music that you provide and that you perform.
Well, yeah. Well, the big band stuff, but it all comes from the same place. And the message that I have for the students, especially when I'm doing workshops, is that it's almost all music is related. It might be your brother or your sister, it might be your cousin, it might be your auntie, but it has some type of relationship. So you just have to know what it is and how to utilize it. So in our performances, my band's listening at Petrushka and Stravinsky. I have a great recording of the Chicago under Schulte that I always send to them, and I say, man, this is how we want to sound.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That you look at a composer like Stravinsky, who was so groundbreaking in what he composed and how he used instruments.
Right. And it's less that than it is the way that orchestra played. It's like a great family. It doesn't matter what a great family is doing. Like you can look at across sections. So you can look at a great football team and a great basketball team and a great soccer team, and there are similarities across the board. You can look at them and say, just as an example, a basketball team could look at a football team and say, this is how we need to operate. So that's how I look at it. So if there's a great, with the students, the funny part of it is, I'd never go so much into how jazz is at the center of all the other musics in terms of American music. I think I need to explain that to students more. So for example, I was just at Davidson College and we were playing a couple of my songs, and my songs are more rooted in I guess you'd say popular culture, or popular music in a certain respect. So the drummer has a thing to play, and I just said, man, have you ever heard grunge rock? He's like, yeah. I said, do you know any rock drum solos? And he's like, yeah. I said, so when your time comes, just start playing whatever your interpretation of a rock drum solo is. He's like, okay. So now he's just like really playing a lot. But now I didn't tell him, well, look, all the rock drummers, that sound comes from Elvin Jones. And I played with Elvin Jones. And all of the rock drummers would come to Elvin's gigs still in his 70s to watch him and see what he was doing. So I didn't make it, you know, I'm not trying to make it like, well, you know, all of this comes from jazz and you need to know jazz. I'm just like, okay, this is what you equate with rock, but it's actually, we're going to use this in this jazz song. And it's the same thing with hip hop or R&B, you know, it's all coming from the same place.
Absolutely. And you can look at dance the same way. I mean, you know, it's all intertwined. I mean, there's, you know, so much cross-pollination across the arts that to isolate one as being better or worse or different or more groundbreaking than the other sort of denies the whole interconnectivity of it all.
Right. Well, you know, from that standpoint, you know, my feeling in again, telling the students that jazz is going to give you the greatest range of options. So if you're learning, really studying jazz, and you have a certain type of harmonic sophistication, you have rhythmic sophistication, you have the sound of the overall group, you have an understanding of improvisation, blues. So jazz covers so many different areas. The challenge that we have is that I think the students don't really understand. They equate jazz with being one thing. And that's kind of chang, chang-a-lang, chang-a-lang. And then a guy gets up there and he does whatever he wants to do. But I'm saying jazz can incorporate anything that you listen to. You know, like, for example, I listen to a rapper, J. Cole. I don't know if you know J. Cole, but I'm asking my drummers, man, why play something like J. Cole? And they get to look like, yeah, but we're playing jazz. I'm saying, man, jazz is not one thing, you know? Jazz is many things. Jazz is everything. It's just a question of how do you use it. And that's what we try to do with the band. We try to bring in as much as we can and have a good time doing it.
Well, and a good time is one thing that jazz and that you do in particular. And I find it interesting that you're going to have completed Mardi Gras there, and then 2 weeks later come to Southern California, where there are a whole bunch of sinners who probably aren't observing Lent anyway, and bringing a Mardi Gras sensibility to the stage. And I'm wondering, what is so exciting for you as a performer in taking this music out of the city that it's perhaps best known for and seeing the reaction it gets from audiences around the world?
Well, you know, everybody likes a party. Everybody wants to have a good time. So, you know, I think our message at this point is, man, you can have a good time. You can have a great time with a jazz band, with a jazz orchestra. Don't think that it's the same as a symphony orchestra. Well, okay, we're going to come to the concert and they're going to sit there and then we're going to wait till the end of the selection and then we're going to clap. It's like we start off saying, all right, everybody get up, you know, so, but you know, it's a great thing. It's a great thing to be able to interact with people. And, you know, one of the advantages of the jazz format is, you know, a lot of times in a popular form, it can tend to sound similar. It have the same kind of a feel for the entire time, for most of the show, I would say. But, you know, I would say we're serving up like a 10-course meal. And we have to work out, okay, this is how this is going to set up emotionally. This is what we're doing. So, yeah, man, it's a great thing.
Well, and it strikes me that as a band leader, that you are almost like the DJ for this party. I mean, you are setting the tone and the pace of the party by virtue of how you create a set list. So what is most important for you when you're putting a show on?
The musicians in the band. That's it, you know, because my shows are designed to please the crowds and to, you know, somebody said, well, man, you got a feel good band. And I said, but why would you have any other kind of band? I'm like, why would you have a band that's not designed to make people feel good? But saying that to say, you know, one of the founding members is Roger Lewis. We call him the Dirty Old Man. Now he's 80 years old now, so he won't be on the road with us. He's out with the Dirty Dozen. But whenever he's on the show, it's actually easy because I know he gets the first solo and the last solo. And then I just have to build it up from there because Roger just has such tremendous energy. and everybody loves the way that he plays. So the difficulty is if he's not there, if I don't have certain musicians, then I don't know actually how we're going to open and close. So once I figure that out, it's all gravy.
Why do you think this music is, do you think it's just the infectious nature of it that brings audiences naturally to their feet and puts smiles on their faces?
Well, it's that, the early music was composed and played for the people. So when you listen at a lot of people like older New Orleans, the traditional New Orleans style, Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, that's because, they called it happy jazz. The design of the music was that it's for the audience. And then somewhere along the 40s and the 50s, I think we got the wrong message, which is that the music is actually for the musicians. And we have to be serious about our craft. And whatever, the audience is secondary. So that's what it is about the New Orleans sound, is that just the celebratory nature of, the African people. Really, it comes back to that. African folks, they come there in Congo Square, and that's really where it all kind of happened. And it's the idea that, now I have agency over what I'm doing for this small period of time. The rest of the week is going to be pretty jive. But right now, so I'm not worried about the rest of the week. I'm celebrating right now. And that's kind of the message. That's the message we're trying to get out here.
Well, it's interesting that you said, some about having fun with it, because you told NOLA.com that you can pay tribute to the history of the music, but still make fun of it. And I'm wondering how much humor is a part of what, I know it's part of who you are. It's part of how people know you for your sense of humor, but I'm wondering how much humor is also a part of what you want to get across musically.
Well, I'm not sure if I said you can make fun of it. I'm not sure exactly what the quote is, but that may have been what they wrote. But the idea is that, you can be very serious, but not take yourself too seriously. So it's like, there are serious matters, but it's a question of how do we approach it? So from that standpoint, ultimately the goal is for the audience to have a good time and to love what's going on. And then somewhere in the middle of that, we can still say, you know what, we can have a great time, but we're going to take a little venture off. So like some of my songs, I've written a song for Breonna Taylor. I've got one, the Notorious RBG, for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We got one for Dr. Fauci. And one of my favorites is, it's more for a smaller group, Lost in the Crescent, which tells about, sharecroppers and that kind of a jive situation that occurred after the Civil War. And I find that people actually are more engaged by those songs a lot of times, because once they get up and it's like, man, this is cool, we're gonna have a good time. Wait a minute. So, it's kind of like the setup. It's like, we are gonna have a good time, but we can also add some other elements in there. And I think that's that range that I'm saying that jazz music or American music, really, it gives you that opportunity.
As a composer, how important is it for people to understand what you're trying to say with your music?
Well, as a composer, but more as a storyteller, I'd say. And if the people don't understand, then that's something that I have to address. I don't feel that the audience has a responsibility or an obligation. It's my responsibility. So just in the way that we structure the solos and the way that the musicians in the band, and that's really the key, is the folks in the band really get an understanding of what we're trying to do. And so I would say it's up to us. And if we don't get the message across, it's because something that we have to address.
Right. I want to go a little bit to the other side and talk a bit more about some serious topics. And I saw an interview that you did with iRock Jazz Music TV. I think it was 2013. And you drew a comparison between American democracy and jazz music, about the concept that you can be on your own, but you still have to function with the totality of the ensemble. And I'm wondering, what role do you think that idea, or perhaps by extension, even jazz music itself, can play in perhaps uniting what is a horribly divided country right now?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I mean, for a number of reasons, the Confederate officers were amongst the only individuals in history that managed to wage war against a country's government and did not pay the ultimate price once they were defeated. And that single decision kind of paved the road for what we're facing now. So it's just always going to be here. And it's one of those things that, oh wait, am I shaking the camera? Oh yeah. One of those things where You know, it's like my dad would say, don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. And that's what we have here. You know, I mean, the absurdity of, you know, people not having their way, therefore they say, oh, this election was rigged. I mean, that rabbit hole that we're in now, man, there's almost no way out of it. You know, I mean, I hate to sound pessimistic about it, but it's, you know, it is so ridiculously absurd that, you know, and, you know, for years, Black folk were the ones that, man, we put up with a lot for a lot of years and just was like, no, man, it's cool. It wasn't enough to have to endure it. But, you know, the ancestors had to assure the oppressors, man, it's cool, actually. All of this jiveness. And, you know, somewhere along the way, I think that actually, it was what was needed and what was necessary, but it's kind of given the wrong message. For now, today, folks are like, if they're not having their way, there's going to be hell to pay. So, you know, having said that, but now to answer your question directly, it's clear with democracy. You know, we can have anybody can come. In fact, when we play the Broad stage, this particular tour, I've got 2 high school alto saxophonists who are going to be joining the band. And one is an Asian American young lady, and the other is a Black man, a Black boy, Black child, Black student. He is a Negro from St. Louis. But now they're both high school students. So it's going to be interesting to me. I really designed it that way so that they can have competition amongst each other. Because what she has, he needs. And what he has, she needs. She's more of like a smooth jazz player. He's more kind of a traditional, what we would call a traditional player. But now I'm saying that to say, man, as far as democracy, we can bring anybody into the band. And as long as they have an open mind and they're willing to go beyond, you know, their normal scope, they can make it happen. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, I go to countless concerts, plays, you know, musicals, et cetera. And there's no one way of assuming the political sensibilities of anybody in any given audience. I mean, unless you're seeing something that's really a polemic, but you see everybody coming together, embracing for 2+ hours, the music, coexisting with everybody happily, and then going back into their sort of bubbles. And it frustrates me, and I would assume that it frustrates you as an artist, that collective sharing of an experience doesn't spill over into day-to-day life.
No, it frustrates me more as an American than it does as an artist. Because as an artist, those 2.5 hours that you described, that's what's important, you know. But, you know, as an American, as a person that, you know, really believes in the democratic process and democracy, it's unfortunate to see folks who say, well, you know what, we're going to define who Americans are. And we're going to, well, you know, this democracy thing was cool when it benefited us. But hold on now, it's not really working. So we got to change the parameters. You know, we have seen enough of this for so many years. But I look back at the way that the ancestors dealt with it. And, you know, there's a reason that Louis Armstrong was our greatest American, because he came from the toughest place and he rose to the best place. And he always somehow, when you listen at his music, manages to put you in a better mood. He never lost the perspective of who he was. And that's what we're always trying to do, not lose the perspective of who we are in the face of the madness that surrounds us. And that's difficult.
And it's interesting because Armstrong faced a lot of criticism for his popularity as well.
Well, I think a lot of people couldn't see the overall picture. And the overall picture was he allowed Charlie Parker to exist. He allowed John Coltrane and Miles Davis to exist, because he was like that rock, that foundation. It's like home. It's like, you know, no matter what jiveness you're facing, but that's the way it's supposed to be. You know, when you get home, it's like, oh man, I'm home. And that's what Louis Armstrong was. So for those who couldn't really see the bigger picture, he understood the bigger picture. He understood that he had the power or the ability to keep people engaged and to keep them in a good mood, so that when they had to confront the radicalism of Thelonious Monk or Charles Mingus, they could always approach that but say, I can come back home to Armstrong. So man, he was just, you can't say enough about Louis Armstrong.
No, I agree. Yeah, you know, I had a conversation recently with Ethan Iverson, talking about his new album, and I think he writes about jazz music and other forms of music as well as anybody. But I was intrigued by something that he told me, because he said that he didn't think it was ever going to get better than John Coltrane or Sonny Rollins, that the only thing people like himself and others can do is figure how to add things to what has come before, but to make it a little bit different, but that we have the peak of jazz music has already happened.
Yeah, well, I think he's off by two people. He should have said Louis Armstrong and Charlie Parker. So it's not going to get better than that. But the reason it's not going to get better, because they had the direct pipeline to the truth, to that direct pipeline to wherever the original source of great music emanates. They knew exactly where it was. And it's almost like saying, well, you know, basketball will never get beyond Michael Jordan, or if it's, you know, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. There are people who can hold that position, but I think that we're judging it from the wrong position. Because, you know, when I played with Elvin Jones, people would come to the gigs and they want to see Coltrane, man. They want to see that. They want to relive the 60s. And Elvin's vibe was like, no, man, that was for that time period. So we have to represent something for this time period. So, you know, I think he's looking at it from the wrong angle. Now, again, we could say that the country is not clearly the same as the 60s. And that's a big part of it. You look at the changes that were going on socially from the 50s and the 60s, and that's what that music represented. And that's what we have to do. We have to figure out, okay, what is the music that best represents what's going on now? You know, I always say that Duke Ellington's music of the 40s or the 50s, it doesn't dictate what jazz is today. It dictated what jazz is with that time. But what Brother Iverson has to understand is that we have to figure out the best way to address what's going on now. And, you know, there's some older people, and I kind of tend to agree with them there, that think, you know, every generation gets a little softer. It's not the same as, you know, when folks didn't have indoor plumbing, and when they had to go out and chop trees and they had to work with their hands. Man, I can see there's something really about that. In fact, you look at pictures of people from the 1800s, like Frederick Douglass, and these guys, they were just big, man. They just, you know what I mean? It's just something, I think, because they didn't have processed food. But anyway, so yeah, I think he's not accurate in a certain respect. I see what he's saying. It's like that level of the combination of the intellect and then the performance. But, you know, the world is way different. We're not playing every night the way that they were. We don't have Louis Armstrong to listen to. And that's the other thing he's got to understand, man. It wasn't only John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins. It was, you know, Count Basie Orchestra. It was, you know, Sammy Davis Jr. It was Frank Sinatra. It was so much going on. And they were always around each other. And that's really the influence. It's almost like the influence we see of Sports Center today. If you watch Sports Center, which I don't, man, they show everything. It's soccer, it's got women's volleyball, it's got this. So it's almost like everybody coming together. That's how the music was in those days.
Well, it's interesting you said that the music was of that particular time, and I'm intrigued by two projects that you did, which, you know, one was Make America Great Again, which I thought was a really ballsy title for an album, frankly. Yeah.
Some would say stupid, but ballsy is good.
but also the work you did with the audio play Shadowland, because I think they both help tell stories, both musically and by the use of language, obviously, because you have Wendell Pierce on your album, and then obviously you're writing for the play. And I'm wondering how much you think that combination of text and music is going to represent today, and what needs to be heard and what needs to be said.
You know, it can. I mean, we're in such a lyric-driven society now. Everything has to have words. When it's strictly instrumental, and that's another point to try to explain to the students, man, it doesn't matter if you sound like, you know, Coltrane, or if you sound like Sonny Rollins, but even if you sound like Charlie Parker, which would be great for us, man, from an audience standpoint of view, it's really hard to make that differentiation. That's just how that is. Whereas with the words, we can get the message across. But, you know, one of the songs we started doing lately is Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? And that story, that's one of the great storytellers in American history. Like, he really captured what was going on at that time. And, you know, if you think of, so I would say the format that we use, I'd want to be more like Marvin Gaye, to write in that in that context. So the format of telling the story and having music, I think it's good, but I don't think that people will embrace that. I think it's necessary. You see what I mean? But it's different to embrace it that way, where you're telling the story that way. Whereas where you have, words like mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, brother, there's too many of you dying. Just really, man, he really understood it and was able to put, and then he captured the sound of the music. That music captured what was going on in the late 60s, early 70s. I'm not sure exactly which one, but that within that 5-year period, when you hear it today, it's still like, man, this cat knew what was going on. So that's what I'd like to hopefully be able to tell stories like Marvin Gaye.
Well, I have to say, that song is still as appropriate today as it was when it first came out, which is sad.
No, it's just reality though. It can be sad, but yeah, and my thing is this, man, and because I'm a believer in understanding the history and understanding what folks have gone through, especially people of color. And there's people that say, well, man, you talk about slavery like you're happy about it. And I say, yeah, but what you have to understand is that there were individuals, and I'm trying to summon their spirits. Like, my great uncle was born in 1896. And he was maybe a half a shade darker than you. So he had like a drop of black in, it's just a reality. But he had such a profound effect on me. And as I get older, I'm really thinking about the time that I spent. I only spent 5 years around him. And this was he was 86. He was 86 or 87 when I met him. I didn't really understand this. And he was 96 when he died. But just thinking about the character of the man. So I'm just saying that to say, if we look at an event like slavery and we say, oh my God, it was so terrible and this and that, man, who wants to live like that? The folks who were in it didn't live like that. It was a terrible situation, but they were like, no, this is just the period, this is just what we're going through right now. And that's my approach, is to really embrace it and accept it and say, where was the glory? Where was the celebration? Where's the goodness? And the goodness is the fact that these people were so strong that they were able to make it happen. They were able to embrace, as Marvin Gaye said, only love can conquer hate. And that's that lesson there. As much as that hatred as folks face, and we saw that hatred on, January 6th last year, we see that hatred in a lot of different places. Somehow we got to just embrace it with love. Say, I'm hoping that you'll change, but if not, it's cool. We still have the love for you.
Right. I want to end with asking you one more question. And I'm not passing, any judgment on your character by asking about this quote. It's just I think it's just a really fun quote about your instrument. It was from George Bernard Shaw, who said, many a sinner has played himself into heaven on the trombone. What would you most like to be playing on your trombone as you're on your way to heaven?
Well, trombone also has a slide, so you equate the slide with the slippery slope in the other direction. Probably What a Wonderful World. And it's a song that Elvin Jones convinced me to play because he really loved Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong and Big Mama Thornton. Those are his favorites. And it's not a song that I thought very much of, but I played it with him for so long and I understood what he understood, which is that is a message that we need to get across as much as possible. And I think he felt that I could hopefully express that similar to how Mr. Armstrong did, different, but with that same level of passion and conviction. So it would be What a Wonderful World.
Well, if you expressed it the same way he did, you wouldn't be yourself, would you?
Right, there you go. Yes, sir.
Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate your taking the time. Are you all right with my posting this interview on YouTube?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Great. I would love to do that. So I will send a link to the Broad team and they'll make sure that you know about it as well.
Okay, cool. All right.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and I hope to be at the show.
Yes, sir. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Catch you later.